Thank you very much. My name is Victoria Sampson. I'm the Washington Office Director for the Secure World Foundation. My colleague Brian Whedon was on the previous panel, so I'll keep my introduction short. But the Secure World Foundation works with governments, industry, international organizations, and civil society to promote ideas and actions for international collaboration that achieve this secure and sustainable use of outer space. So I'm very pleased to be able to moderate this panel. We have a fantastic spectrum of viewpoints represented, both military and civil, European and Asian. I look forward to seeing your questions. Just because you don't have the bios of our speakers in front of you, I thought I'd go down the line and introduce each speaker as they speak. So starting off will be Lieutenant Colonel Stefan Huland. He is with the German Air Force Headquarters, Capability Management and Space Surveillance. He is responsible for the further development and implementation of capabilities for the GSSAC. He started working in the forces in 1990. He studied business economics at the Federal Armed Forces University in Munich, had an assignment as a master controller in Control and Reporting Center, including fighter control and air surveillance production, and in 2009 was assigned to the German Air Force Development Center with projects for stratospheric platforms. Since 2012, he has been in the GAF headquarters responsible for space surveillance capabilities for the GSSAC. He will give a short statement about his organization as well as some words about cooperation from the German point of view. And during his presentation, during other presentations, I'd like to remind you, you can text questions, which will come up here and I can ask them for you. The phone number, or the text number is on the main screen, but in case you can't read it, it's 559-426-6712. With that, Stefan.
Thank you, Victoria, very much for the opportunity to participate in this panel discussion on the beautiful island of Maui here in Hawaii. Many aspects regarding space situational awareness have already been mentioned, and we agree on the fact that the importance of functioning space-based services being provided by both civilian and military capabilities is ever more increasing. Cooperation in the SSA area probably is the only possible way of protecting space infrastructure so that the services can be made of use of permanently. Let me now describe to you some of the German efforts in this field. In 2009, the German Space Situational Awareness Center, GSAC, this abbreviation has no D in it, so we don't have to think about that, was established. It is jointly operated by the Federal Ministry of Defense and the Federal Ministry of Economics and Technology. In this context, a high level of integration of military and civil requirements has been demonstrated from the very beginning. Space Management Association personnel of the German Aerospace Center has been an integral part of the effort from the start. The existing cooperation with research institutes, national universities, for example, the Braunschweig National Technical University and the Fraunhofer Institute for High-Frequency Physics and Radar Techniques, and the University of Bern, to name but a few, is an important part of the GSAC's capability enhancement and will be ever more extended. As the beginning of next year, the GSAC will be transferred from a pilot project to a real operation. Final operation capability will be reached in 2020. Until today, the personnel strength has increased from 3 military posts in 2009 to 43 military posts of German Air Force and 10 posts of the DLR Space Management Association. 75% of the soldiers are officers having complete university studies and holding degrees in subject areas of aeronautical and space engineering, computer science, mathematics, and electrical engineering. As far as the personal situation is concerned, we are in a good position. At the present, the GSAC does not yet possess any national census of its own for the purpose of compiling a picture of the space situation. In the capability management area, options of establishing these capabilities are currently being reviewed. For this purpose, the GSAC equipment, which is presently still prototypical equipment, will have to be adapted or enhanced to an equipment required for real operations. Corresponding budget funds have already been included or requested for the budget plan for the years 2016 to 2020. In the area of space reconnaissance and identification, a cooperation with the Research Institute of Fraunhofer Institute for High-Frequency Physics and Radar Techniques, operating the TIRA tracking and imaging radar, space identification radar near Bonn, is scheduled from 2015 on. This cooperation is to enable permanent military operational access to the imaging capabilities of TIRA and the analysis of the Fraunhofer Institute regarding space objects. In order to achieve a capability augmentation in the space surveillance area as well, a DLR space management study on the possible procurement of a space surveillance sensor to be used for preparing an object data catalog in Germany is currently underway. Both GSEC partners, the DLR Space Management Association and the forces, are therefore eager to enhance the GSEC capabilities, thus contributing to global SSA. Together we will ensure that the GSEC will reach its final operation capability within the scheduled time frame. For the capabilities of the GSEC, international cooperation is mandatory, and we are highly interested to extend our existing cooperation, especially with the US, the Five Eyes nations, and France. And we are open for the dialogue and an exchange of experience with additional international cooperation partners. There have already been joint exercises like a tabletop exercise in Suffolk at the beginning of this year with participants from the Five Eyes nations, Germany and France, as well as joint campaigns during which we have gathered much experience but have also made contributions of our own. Germany recognizes also the obligation to gradually improve this SA capability in Europe. One of the steps required is the complementary use of existing installation in Germany, France and UK. At present, the SSA capabilities in Europe are based on bilateral military cooperation between the US Strategic Command and the German, French and UK capabilities. Negotiations on, regarding to the Joseph Koller speech, negotiations on SSA sharing agreements are currently underway between Germany and the United States. However, the Federal Ministry of Defense Directorate General for Security and Defense Policy and Legal Affairs is responsible for the form of treaty and the negotiations. In Germany, responsibilities concerning few points of the sharing agreement fall under the area of responsibility of the Federal Foreign Office, so that some modifications of the agreement were required in order to the signature authority to remain with the Federal Ministry of Defense and to enable timely signing. The German draft was transmitted to the United States Strategic Command in August, and we hope it will be signed by end of the year. But from the German point of view, there are some reconnaissance and object identification are national core tasks strictly having to remain under military control. The European Union has started a space surveillance and tracking support program involving the establishment of a consortium which is to provide SSA services at the European level using the existing capabilities of each member. Together with France and UK, the approach where the sovereignty of the capabilities provided remains intact and the sensitive data of individual nations are taken into account is supported at the European level. As matters stand at present, the Federal Ministry of Economics and Technology will assume the control and of the German element in close coordination with the military of the above consortium. And that concludes my statement. Mahalo for your attention.
Thank you, Stephen. Next, we have Wing Commander Raina Owens. She is an aerospace battle manager by background. Her operational tours include the Falkland Islands in 1999, Iraq in 2003, and the ISAF Joint Command in Kabul in 2010. Wing Commander Owens' last tour was commanding RAF Feiling-Dell's missile warning and space surveillance radar. She has now returned to the Ministry of Defense, working in the air staff with a portfolio that includes space and cyber. She will be giving us a UK perspective on SSA sharing. Raina?
Thank you very much, Victoria, and thank you for the invitation to attend this conference, Maui Economic Development Board. I think this is a great event. My first time here, but congratulations to all the hard work that must have gone in behind the scenes. We've had a joke from my German colleague and lots of quotes, so I was thinking when I was listening to General Huyton, what quote could I leverage that would sum up some of the challenges involved in SSA? And my thoughts turned immediately to Rumsfeld and that famous quote about the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. I think one of our challenges in SSA as we move forward is we have far too many of the latter category of those. Sorry, I'm muddling my words. So with that, I thought I'd talk to you a little bit about the UK, where we've been previously, where we are at the moment, and then perhaps throw some pebbles in the pond about the future and why perhaps we really need to be working quite hard now, because I only see the challenge getting harder as we move forward. So with that in mind, well, the UK has been doing space for more than 50 years. I had the great privilege, as Victoria said, in my last position to command BMU's Site 3, RAF Feiling-Dell's. And while I was there in September 2013, we had some fantastic celebrations to celebrate our 50 years of joint working with our US partners. So we've been in this game a long time. But has the UK necessarily understood or taken it seriously? I'm a straight-talking Brit, I'd say no. Are we doing that now, and have we been doing that for the last couple of years? I think so. So one of the key things in that area, and I describe it as the awakening UK consciousness on space and why it's important. Now, I'm sure those of you out there are very keen on space, so you will know that we published our National Space Security Policy at the end of April this year. A policy document, and as the General said earlier, does it always have the right words in the right time? Don't know. However, it is significant for us and was the culmination of about 2 years working cross-government to talk through some of the issues. I'd like to share with you, it's downloadable online for those of you interested, the 4 objectives. To make the UK more resilient to the risk of disruption to space services and capabilities, including from space weather. To enhance the UK's national security interests through space. To promote a safe and more secure space environment. And to enable industry and academia to exploit science and grasp commercial opportunities in support of national space security systems. Nothing revolutionary there, but very important to say it. So a lot of the focus of what we in the Ministry of Defence are doing is working cross-government with our partners to work out the next steps and how we take things forward. I said the last few years have been quite important for us. If I track back to the 2011, the National Growth Strategy produced by our Treasury cited space as one of 8 key technologies. And since then, we've seen a year-on-year growth in terms of our UK space industry. In 2010, the United Kingdom Space Agency was formed, and in this last year, they have significantly increased their manpower. We've seen the Satellite Applications Catapult bring together some, what is, I think, quite exciting UK technology leads in terms of the space sector, particularly in things like the small satellite end of the scale. And for me as an airman, I sense the atmosphere is almost like the days when Whittle first produced the jet engine. So I think in the commercial sector, there's lots of excitement in what's going on. So what are the challenges? So for us, we probably have an easier way ahead in some ways because we're pretty small in space, across defence, across government and across industry. We don't have a lot. At the moment, we aspire to, but that makes the discussions, the coming up with ideas and the ways ahead, in lots of ways, a lot easier when I look across the pond and look at the challenge of the size and structure and diversity of the US space sector. So just perhaps we might have the odd good idea that might make you think about a different approach, perhaps. Okay, so what are the challenges within defence? Well, I know that my leaders take SATCOM for granted. And had I said about a couple of years ago, I would say they probably didn't think too much beyond that, because space, it's too expensive. Someone else will do it for us. And we can't talk about it anyway, really, can we? Well, I don't think that's true anymore. And I'm delighted to say that our leadership now realises that those 3 things are not the same. So, what are we doing in the UK? So that's the contextual background, I guess. So what are we doing at the moment? Well, we realise those common threads that everyone else has mentioned, that SSA, we can't do it alone, but we have an important part to play. There's a thread about how do we work with the UK Space Agency, who represent the UK on the UN and within ESA. How do we work together to do more? And the Air Force is leading on work to think how we best develop the SSA. Our SPOC, our Space Operations Coordination Centre, like the German GSAC, is still fairly immature, founded around the 08-09 timeline, and we aspire to develop that into a much bigger, more encompassing, possibly CivMil centre. That's all still work in progress, and have we got the funds to do it yet? No, not quite, but we're working on it, and we're thinking about it. We're also thinking in terms of capability. With the world changing, things getting smaller, access to space getting more cost effective, I don't think we can use the "it's too expensive" argument anymore. And given the current understanding of the challenges of the 3 Cs, 4 Cs, or 5 Cs, however you wish to describe the space domain, I don't think that we can afford not to do anything. So there is quite a lot of work in progress. We're thinking about that international domain, and my German colleague mentioned the EU Space Surveillance Tracking Initiative. We're trying to think about what role we might have with that, how we might work with our existing partners to collaborate for the future. It's all work in progress, I have to say, so there aren't too many concrete things right now, but I think it's all looking quite promising. We would be happy to consider and talk to anyone, but one of the challenges we have right now is in our people. So in my second dedicated space tour, and having done space previously in one of my jobs, I probably sit in the top 10 in terms of Air Force experience. That's not bigging me up, that's just saying we have a challenge in terms of the experience levels we have within our department. So one of the other things we're considering is how do we have some very knowledgeable individuals, but how do we predictably grow and train the right people for the future? Interesting enough, in recent weeks, and through a very interesting forum we have in the UK called the Space Leadership Council, that brings together government, industry and academia. One of the challenges with all that growth that we've been experiencing is, do we have the right STEM background in education for our children for the future to support that? And given we, the military, can't always attract the best people in specialist areas, because to be frank, we don't necessarily pay enough, how do we as the military solve that problem for the future? So there's a fair bit on the personnel side still to be done, but it's all thought. Finally then, before I hand over, our Development Concepts and Doctrine Centre do something called our Global Strategic Trends process. And we've just done our update, which is looking out to the 2035-2040 timeline. I worked with our SME pool to try and make the space element of that representative of where the future might be. And it's crystallised thoughts into the fact that we think things are difficult now. We just wait till that timeline. Our view is that there will be an exponential change within this domain, exponential compared to the other domains, when you think about the challenges of space tourism near satellites and the impact that might have on a currently unagreed and undefined boundary with space. We talk about increasing the number of people in space in the future. We talk about things that industry are looking at, you could say it speculatively or not, power generation, big data in space, asteroid mining, manned missions to the moon and Mars and beyond. I would suggest that any challenges we think we have now will only magnify with time. That is all I have, Victoria. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next, we have Lieutenant Colonel Damien Gardien, who is the current head of the newly created Operational Center for the Military Surveillance of Space Objects of the Air Defense and Air Operations Command, which is part of the French Air Force. As such, he is in charge of operating French Air Force space surveillance sensors and providing SSA to the French Armed Forces and governmental authorities. This includes the coordination and support of French efforts during hazardous reentry forecasts and also sensor support to CNES conjunction analysis activities. His presentation will discuss rationales and perspectives for the new French military SSA Center and its place among other French governmental stakeholders. Damien.
Thanks, Victoria, for the introduction. First of all, I'd like to say that I feel honored to be among you today. It's my first experience in EMOS, and it feels great. I'd like to thank also MEDB and Space Foundation and Secure World Foundation, because the organization was seamless so far. It's a really great experience. So I'm here to talk about the new French military SSA center. It's called Cosmos. So it's a nice name and easy to remember. Well, the center is brand new, but in fact, it's been an ongoing long-term progression. It all started with the fact that France was always concerned about its autonomous appraisal of situations, and it goes for the space situation as well. But before going on, I'd like to give some precision about the sense I will use for space situation and space situational awareness, because in my experience, people sometimes use those words for the same things, and to me, it's not. So that's my definition. I'm not saying there are the definitive ones, but in my speech, that's what I mean by space surveillance and SSA. So space surveillance, it's really about getting your own piece of the space situation. It doesn't matter why. I mean, you could look for more precision, more responsiveness, or in the case of the French government, more autonomy. So it means you operate your own sensors, right? Space situational awareness is, first of all, knowing what influence the space situation has on your operations. And I mean civilian as well as military operations, and I mean in space or on Earth. It doesn't matter. So the space situation would be both the orbital situation and the space weather situation. So in France, it all started in the 90s with a full comprehensive space surveillance program for LEO. I don't know if a lot of people know about that. Have you ever heard of this? No, no one. Okay. So, well, what happened in the mid-90s? There were budget cuts, so not much is left, but the most interesting part remained, and it was the GRAV system. It was the right choice to do because it was the surveillance system. So it gave us really what we expected in terms of autonomy. And it's a cornerstone for space surveillance. So what happened, GRAV came into operation in 2005, thanks to French Air Force finances. And the rationale then was, from a French point of view, space surveillance is part of Homeland Air Defense. So it's part of the French law. So we're almost 9 years later, and only then the French Air Force creates its own SSA center. Why? Well, I would say there are three reasons. Political reasons, first of all, because in our white papers on defense and security, well, our government have been asking for more space surveillance. Of course, they don't expect us to do it alone. It's really part of cooperation, but we still need to improve by ourselves. There are military reasons, because we managed through years to outreach military authorities and convince them that without space and without space situational awareness, they will lack effectiveness. And nowadays, we're more and more reliant on technology and then reliant on space. So you have to know what's happening to be sure you're efficient. And third is technical reasons. In 2005, the mission was brand new to us, and we had to learn. With experience came skills, and with skills, we encompassed what was the real scope of what could be done with our sensors. So what's the Cosmos for? Well, we'd like to take full advantage of our sensors. We are operating, so there's GRAV, and there's also SATAM radars. There are tracking radars. And we have some experimental assets. That's for the autonomous appraisal of the space situation. And so far, we're watching almost 3,000 objects with only one surveillance asset. I think it's not bad. we'd like to build a more comprehensive, recognized space picture through the integration of our space situation and other data available, including space weather. And the third part of our work will be to provide SSA products to the armed forces, but also to governmental entities. So like Victoria said during the introduction, it means supporting our French space agency with collision risk assessment and re-entry, hazardous re-entries forecasts. What are the perspectives? Well, first of all, we're getting bigger in this center. We aim to be better at what we've done so far. We hope to be more responsive, more reactive, and also more cooperative ready. There are indeed a lot of initiatives going on. For example, the United States and France are fruitfully progressing on SSA data exchanges. On an operational level, US Stratcom suggested to the French Joint Space Command a new forum called the Operational Planning Talks. It is developing practical exchanges between the JSPOC and the French Air Force. We also had a tabletop exercise in April, and that enabled us to draft some common procedures. On a legal level, we're progressing too with a data sharing agreement, and we are already looking into a following agreement. In Europe, well, Germany and France are natural partners, I would say, because our systems are very complementary. So together, we would be able to build a core SSA service for the Europe. I'm thinking about collision risk assessment. But again, we need to improve our sensors and maybe, well, acquire some more to have a full service enables that would give us our share of the burden in Europe, I mean. But of course, this European SSA initiative is open to any European country that would bring significant assets. And from that perspective, UK would be a great partner too. So back to the French military SSA center. Once on the strategic level, the exchanges will be settled, we'll be the ones implementing it and executing the exchanges of data and maybe even sensor tasking. Still, the French Air Force space surveillance and SSA activities right now are transferring from Paris to Lyon, and well, we're transforming too. So I guess we can't expect a full operational capability before several years, at least 3 of them, because we need to get relevant skilled operators as well as softwares. And then what's the place of this center among other governmental stakeholders in SSA? Well, to me, there are 3 of them. We've got the French Joint Space Command, we've got the French Air Force, and we've got CNES, the French Space Agency. The French Joint Space Command, it's the gateway to any military, national, or international matter. It is in charge of the strategic joint level that leads military space matters, including SSA. As such, it is in charge of preparing future SSA programs and international cooperation. It is also the military authority that will request SSA products for joint operation, requesting it to the Cosmos. The French Air Force is in charge of space surveillance and SSA up to what its skills enables it. So that leads me to the CNES part of it. First of all, as the French Space Agency, CNES is the legal expert for any space matter, including SSA. For example, it's the authority that authorizes satellite launches and checks compliances with, for example, good practices for end-of-life operations. From an SSA perspective, like, as Victoria said, CNES is in charge of the calculation for collision risk assessment and the hazardous reentries forecast. CNES is also a software provider for orbital mechanics to the French Air Force. And of course, CNES has several research activities regarding SSA. So, to put it in a nutshell, if you're a space agency and want to cooperate with France in SSA, well, you have to ask CNES for it, because it's French regulation. If you're not a space agency and you want to cooperate in orbital mechanics, collision risk assessment, reentry forecast, that's the CNES part. If you're not a space agency and like to talk about any other SSA matter, any SSA matter regarding, I would say, military assets, well, the French Joint Space Command is your point of contact. And if you want to do work with the Cosmos, you have to ask them, and they will hand us the work. So that would conclude my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Damien. Next, we have Professor Dr. Thomas Schildenich. He is currently leading the Optical Astronomy Group of the Astronomical Institute of the University of Bern, Switzerland, and is the director of the Swiss Optocardinal Ground Station and Geodynamics Observatory Zimmerwald. His research combines an interest in astrodynamics and optical survey observations with a particular emphasis in astronometry. He represents ESA and the Interagency Space Debris Coordination Committee Working Group on Measurements. Since 2011, he is member on behalf of Switzerland of the Expert Group B of the UN COPUOS Working Group on Long-Term Sustainability of Activities in Outer Space. In 2013, he was appointed the chair of the ESA Space Situational Awareness Advisory Group, advising the ESA director responsible for the SSA program. He will be giving us a short briefing on our national SSA European efforts, where he will give some historic background, describe the ESA and EU activities, and end with some thoughts concerning the future. And I would just like to emphasize, for his request, he is not representing ESA or EU, but just has been involved in European activities since many years as an expert and space debris researcher, and is giving his opinion on these issues. Thomas?
Thank you, Victoria, for this kind introduction, and thank you for having invited me to that panel. I also would like to thank MEDB for organizing this event and the conference. I think both are important enabling events for international collaboration. So, as mentioned, I'll try to give you an overview on the European efforts. And when I say European, I really mean the integrated European efforts, not going to touch the national efforts which have been described by my colleagues on the panel. So, Europe started off with having limited national capabilities for many, many years, and the efforts concentrated especially on tracking active assets, launches, missiles, on reconnaissance, and on ballistic missile early warning. So interestingly enough, in 1986, ESA established a space debris working group, and this group came out with a report 2 years later, and it was actually the first report on space debris. ESA then went off and set up a space debris research program in the 90s, and by first establishing models for the space debris environment, going off for radar observations which were used to determine the flux of debris, especially in LEO, and setting off in situ debris monitors to know more about the submillimeter population in LEO and also in GEO. So from 2000 onwards, ESA established the first, together with my institution, the first civilian catalog of orbits of space debris. There were first limited national surveillance capabilities, especially in LEO, as my French colleague mentioned to you, especially the Graf's French radar. And there were, on the ESA side and on national sides, the first assessment or the first activities concerning a conjunction assessment, first based on TLEs and later on JSPOC CSMs, complemented with tracking data from national assets. In 2008, ESA established the SSA program. This program was, from its beginning, an optional program. It includes 3 segments. We call them SST, Space Surveillance and Tracking, Space Weather, the second one, and the third one was the NEO, Nearest Object segment, or is this segment. So the program has 2 phases right now. There was a first phase, which ended up in 2012. It was called the preparatory phase, and there is a second phase right now from 2013 to 2016. The second initiative came up recently and finally culminated in an agreement in 2014, and it's the it's the European Union SSA framework, which was already touched by my colleagues. And I will try to describe these 2 initiatives very briefly. So the ESA one had a first phase, as I mentioned, with 13 participating states. It focused on space surveillance and tracking, but also included some activities in the area of space weather and nearest objects. And the funding, and you see and you will see, it's a moderated funding for an ambitious program. The funding was around 50 million euros. The main activities of that first phase were a top-down design approach, which included the SSA mission and customer requirements, the system requirements, the architecture, and some interim, governance and data policy was put in place. There was also development for the SSA applications and pilot data centers for all segments, a breadboard radar, or actually 2 radars, a monostatic and a bistatic one, and a design for wide field optical telescope. Phase 2, which was started past year, includes 14 states, or 14 states are participating, not the same as in the first phase, for different reasons. The activities will now focus on the space weather segment, primarily. There will be some limited activities in the area of nearest objects and space surveillance and tracking. The funding is in the same range. It's 48 million euros right now. So let me now briefly describe you the European Union Framework Program for Space Surveillance and Tracking Support. So it should first of all consist of a support framework. It's intended to assess and reduce the risk to in-orbit operations of European spacecraft, especially relating to collisions. It should reduce the risk relating to the launch of European spacecraft and do some surveying of the uncontrolled re-entries, providing more accurate and efficient early warnings with the aim of reducing the potential risk to the safety of Union citizens and mitigation of potential damage to terrestrial infrastructure, and finally, seeking to prevent the proliferation of space debris. So this is the official language of this program. And there's a series of actions. So first of all, the actions should establish and operate some sensor functions. And now that's an important point. Sensor functions consisting of a network of member state, ground-based or space-based sensors, including national sensor developments, or including national sensors, developed through ESA to survey and track space objects, and to produce a database thereof. It should also establish a processing function to process and analyze SST data at national level, setting up of a function to provide SST services, and, important as well, the SST support framework shall not cover the development of new SST sensors. So as you see, it's a framework trying to integrate national capabilities. The services should include collision risk assessment and warning during all phases of a mission, detection and characterization of in-orbit fragmentation and breakups, risk assessment of uncontrolled re-entries, and an important point as well, the SST services should be driven by civilian user requirements. There's also an interesting statement about the international cooperation. So, should have regard to cooperation with international partners, in particular the United States of America. Funding for this exercise. So the funding will be of the order of 70 million euros over the coming 6 years. So again, you see, it's a moderated funding in view of the challenges ahead of us. So let me summarize the two programs once again. So the ESA program has 3 segments: space surveillance and tracking, space weather, and NEO. It's about a top-down development of a European SSA system. And the intention was to develop and establish European SSA sensors, data centers, tasking centers, and services. And it was also clear right from the beginning that operations would not be performed by ESA, but by somebody else. And that was always kind of an open question. The European Union would have been a candidate, of course. You know, ESA has some experience in this. When you think about Galileo, for example, has been mandated by the European Union to develop the system, but the operation will not be done by ESA. On the other side, the EU framework, it's about the networking of national sensors, data centers, services. And you may now ask the question, why has Europe these two different kind of initiatives? And one important point, you have to know the history, first of all, and secondly, one important point in the EU framework is actually that the main concern was that the SST services will have a security dimension which the EU unlike the ESA, which is a research and development agency, has competence to deal with. I don't want to go into more details. Europe is a complicated structure. You have seen that there is many countries included in all these initiatives, and just to give you a flavor, it's not even the same countries which are members of ESA than which are members of the European Union. So let me conclude with some open questions. So all the current approaches are based on classification of orbital data, stringent data policies and security requirements, and on a centralized conjunction assessment operation by individual SSA systems, being it, the United States system, national systems, European systems. So the consequences for the outside users, and I mean outside of the SSA systems, are that 95% of the objects larger than 10 centimeters are debris. And many of them, for many different reasons, have been classified. And we heard today that there is this initiative to unclassify what we call the analyst, or you call the analyst data sets in your country here in the United States. So this was a big issue for a long time. The next one is that precise orbital data is classified in most or in all of these SSA systems. So this limits the sharing of orbital data. And right now it's limited to sharing orbital data in case of identified conjunctions. I mean precise orbital data via bilateral agreements, and we got the examples today. There's a big problem with that. This data, which is provided to the end user, cannot be verified by the user, and it's not traceable by the user. And Moriba Jha in the previous panel pointed out the importance of these two issues, because if you want to fuse that data with your own data, which is not possible right now, you would need to have much more information about the raw data. And the own conjunction screening is currently not possible because you don't have access to precise data, or users don't have access to precise data, perhaps to their own data, but not to shared data. So a couple of questions. How are we going to include new actors? How are we going to include SST data from civilian commercial providers, for example, from the International Scientific Optical Network, just to name one of them? How to enable civilian, commercial, international, intergovernmental organizations to do conjunction assessment services on their own? How to include operator data? And let me touch about what we are almost worried about. That's how we are going to ensure the long-term sustainability of the space environment for different purposes. And of course, one of the most important aspects is to prevent war in space, but that's only one of the aspects. So I'm convinced that this will require joint efforts of all of the actors. It cannot be handled by a single nation, so it's going to be a truly international undertaking. And from the technical point of view, the fusion of SST data will be required to provide a complete, accurate, and timely picture of all space object trajectories, and I'm talking about the trajectories only. And an important point here, which was already pointed out by the previous panel, the fusion of that data will require the sharing of, let's say, some pre-processed raw data, but it will require the sharing of raw data. And finally, the actors launching or operating space objects shall have responsibilities. We heard about these today already. Responsibilities under the jurisdiction of states, for example, the states which are providing the licenses. But I think it's a very important issue that these states recognize their responsibilities to educate all of these actors. It's not only the commercial operators, but it's the zillions of people out there which would like to launch a CubeSat, a nanosat. So with that, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Nick. And last but certainly not least, we have Dr. Jang-Hyun Park. He is affiliated with the Korea Astronomy and Space Science Institute, or KASI. His title is Manager, Space Situational Awareness Center, Principal Scientist. He has a PhD degree in astronomy from Yonsei University, Seoul, Korea, which he received in 1995. Since 1992, he has been with KASI, and he has been in his present position for 4 years. He'll be giving us a brief introduction to preparedness plan for space hazards in Korea, recently established, and international collaboration issues related to it.
Thank you, Victoria, for your introduction. I'm happy to join the SSA Polish Forum today, and special thanks to the Maui Economic Development Board for organizing the forum and inviting me. SSA field is one of the newest field in Korea. Although I have been at this position for about 4 years, I think I'm still a novice in this field. However, I can say it is one of the fastest growing field in Korea. Today, I will give you a brief introduction to preparedness plan for space hazard recently established in Korea, and some topics about international collaboration related to it. Korea started space development about 20 years ago and concentrated on making and launching satellites during the last 20 years. About 14 satellites already went into the space. And we have a plan to have about 50 more satellites in the coming 20 years. However, most Korean people were not aware of hazards from the space objects like re-entry and collision of a satellite until the re-entry event of the Röntgen, a German space telescope for X-ray observation. The re-entry of Röntgen aroused much interest in mass media and then government people. KASI played a major role to predict orbital decay and to propagate re-entry information to people and related organizations. Following re-entry events, like Russian Mars explorer Phobos Grunt and also Russian satellite Cosmos 1484 and European satellite Goche make people aware of a new kind of threats from the space. The threat posed by asteroid has become also one of the important issues. The Chelyabinsk meteor, which entered Earth's atmosphere of Russian territory and injured about 1,500 people, was one of the striking news in 2013. This March in Korea, a fireball as bright as a full moon was observed over the whole country. And next day, a stone, which is supposed to be a piece of a meteorite, was found around the Jinju area, a southern part of Korea. Total 4 pieces their total weight about 20 kilograms, were found around the Jinju area consecutively. And it is confirmed that they are all fall meteorite originated from the fireball event. The Jinju meteor event made people to be boiled up for a while. At the time, the main issue was the price of Jinju meteorites because of wrong price information from mass media and internet portal sites. The price range up to more than 100 times than normal prices. And that happening could be cooled down just on the intervention of a prime minister. Anyway, Jinju and Chelyabinsk meteor event also made people aware of another kind of threat from the space, which is not a movie, but a real event. A need for safety of people and protection of space assets from space hazard was reflected in the related law. The National Space Development Promotion Act, which was amended to take action with respect to hazard from the space. In May of 2014, Korean government finally established the National Preparedness Plan for space hazard based on the amended law. The main goal of this plan are, first, to have capabilities of prompt action for space hazard. Second, to build up national space hazard monitoring system. Third, to enhance preparedness capabilities for space hazard. Each goal corresponds to National System for Emergency Management, a facility and technologies for observation of space objects, and evaluation of risks, and infras for international collaboration and education, respectively. Facilities and technologies among them are of CASH's special interest as a research institute. They include development of facilities to monitor natural and artificial space objects and to analyze risk factor and hazard level. In the plan, there are many specific items for monitoring space objects based on radar and/or optical devices, like all-sky surveillance camera, optical wide-field pattern network, and array radar, a meteor monitoring network, ultra-wide-field telescope, 2-meter-class optical telescope, surveillance and imaging radar, and so on. Among them, there are some items for international collaboration as a prerequisite. For example, the role model of the array radar is the KABOOM, K-band Objects Observation and Monitoring Project conducted by NASA. A basic concept of the ultra-wide-field telescope was borrowed from the ATLAS, Asteroid Terrestrial Impact Last Alert System project conducted by University of Hawaii and NASA. The imaging radar was from German TIRA, Tracking and Imaging Radar System, and so on. Even though there are some items that collaboration is ongoing, and most items are still on the planning stage, and there is no direct contact for collaboration yet. It is clear that there are more needs for international collaboration to embody our plan in the near future. Basically, preparing for space hazard is a global issue for the peaceful use of the space and need global international collaboration. Korean people is now aware of hazards from the space and hope to join the worldwide effort to mitigating threat from the space. And KASHI, as a key research institute for preparing space hazard, will play a major role in developing national facilities, studying research topics, and promoting international collaborations. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. You can still text questions to the number at the bottom of the screen, which again is 559-426-6712. But we can start off with a few questions we have lined up in the queue as well. The first question has to do with prioritization. First of all, I'd be interested to know, space is expensive, and during this time of budgetary restrictions, how do you convince political leadership that is something that should be invested and focused on? Damian brought up the idea of burden sharing. How do you bring up the possibility of your leadership? And a secondary question about prioritization, where does SSA rank in terms of your national space priorities overall? If you guys, whoever wants to take first crack at that.
Shall I start then?
Sure.
Dealing with our leadership and selling space and developing an understanding is a lot of what I do. And for me, it's the understanding the context of it. So very much the message I try and sell within the department and cross-government is, do we really think, given the amount of reliance we have, not just in the military, but in everyday life, that we can afford not to think about it? And it's that selling the understanding when space isn't, and the assets in it aren't things you can easily get your head around or your arms around. You can't see it, you can't easily touch it. So, but for me, it's a, do we have a choice but to do this? And that makes the prioritization question a little bit easier.
Anyone?
I think leadership is kind of support. Support from forefront countries, United States and the European nations. Would be very helpful support from forefront nations, because, for example, Korea is just started about just 5 years ago. So we are trying, but we are there are a lack of information and manpower. So sharing information and technology from the forefront country is very helpful to develop our SSA in the field.
I
Yes,
think,
sir.
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
I think prioritization is a very important question and a very difficult one, because it's all different on, or depending on who you are. I mean, if you're an operator, you're mainly concerned in questions about safety of flight. So you want to do collision avoidance because you don't want to have your bird hit by a piece of debris. If you're a military, you want to have the full picture. And for example, safety of flight is one thing, but knowing immediately what happened to your spacecraft in a contingency event is another thing. If you're a scientist, you are most concerned about the long-term sustainability of outer space. If you are an insurance company, you're concerned about the next 20 years. So it all depends on from which side you're looking at that question. I think it's to convince our leadership. We have some very nice pictures. They're not nice, but they're convincing. Just show them how the number of debris increased throughout the few years. Just show them the events which triggered a lot of the discussion we are, the items which we are discussing right now, the collisions. Show them the long-term evolution of the environment. And it's frightening. The long-term evolution of the environment, if you're not going to do anything, is such that we will have an exponential growth of collisions, the collision rate, an exponential growth of debris in certain regions in space. And I think from a long-term perspective, and long-term perspective for our society, because we are depending so strongly on space right now, is really to prevent that long-term growth, or to moderate, limit that long-term growth of objects in space with all measures we can. I mean, one most important measure is to prevent any war in space. The other one is to prevent collisions. But be aware of the fact, I mean, collision avoidance. You can do collision avoidance actively only for the few percent of the active objects. For the 95% of the objects, you have no chance to do collision avoidance right now actively, unless you go for some other measures. And this 95% of the population, which will driving the future evolution of that population. Keep that in mind. So, I mean, we have been touching the subject of active debris removal. That's just one measure. But keep in mind, the long term is not driven by what we are doing right now, collision avoidance with active spacecraft.
Well, regarding prioritization, it's not really a problem to convince politicians. I mean, in France, like I stated, we have 2 white papers asking for more space surveillance. Europe has been writing about space surveillance for decades, right? So people know it's important. But then, well, space, it's all about trade-offs, right? Whatever the domain you're working in. So why do we want space situational awareness? Because we have space operations, so it comes first. And like it was stated earlier, again, it's not because you're one country or one group of countries agreeing on what's to be done. Inside, you have plenty of different forces struggling. Regarding SSA, for example, in the military, well, it's important. But is it important if you don't have the means to do your operations, first of all? So what's the meaning of having SSA if you don't have planes, if you don't have people in the army? So it's hard to convince military authorities to invest a lot. They understand they have to, but again, it's a trade-off, a finance trade-off, budget trade-off. Another part of the explanation would be the public comprehension. I think nowadays space is considered commonplace. It's not. Well, it's hard to launch a satellite. You need a lot of efforts to control it. You need a lot of technology to build it. So I guess SSA is mostly a spacefaring issue. I mean, you wouldn't be responsible not having a minimum of space situational awareness, whereas you're launching satellites into space. I mean, it goes along. So that's how I view it.
Thank you. Next question for the panel, if you could discuss what challenges do you have in developing your own cadre of space experts and in-house expertise for such specialized issues such as space situational awareness? This kind of goes back to the idea of how do you prep for STEM education?
I'm conscious that I'm one of the few native speakers here, so I'll start while my colleagues think about it. I think we've recognised, as I said in my piece, the importance of doing it, and we're starting to think about how we, in the military, but as I said, nationally as well, how we do it better. Coming from Fylingdales, we spent quite a lot of time supporting STEM activities, and we're now starting to think, how can we in the military do that? I look to definitely my French and German colleagues, and they're a bit further down the path than we are, because I think they have better knowledge base within their areas. And I look to the US and the likes of General Hyten, who has been living and breathing space for years. We can't aspire to that in the shorter term, but even the US Air Force and Air Force Space Command would say that they haven't got it right either. So I don't think there are any easy answers, but I'm quite keen, and we in the UK are quite keen to see how we link better between defence, our colleagues in Space Agency, the commercial sector and the academic sector as well, because I think we've all got to work together to improve it for the future.
Yeah, for the German point of view, for us it's very important to have a close cooperation with our research institutes and with the civilian part, with the Space Management Association, the DLR, which is our part of the GSEC. There's a lot of knowledge and we can cope with that. And also the cooperation with the Fraunhofer Institute, which are having the Tyra radar is very important for us to get the knowledge. And we, by ourselves, we get our people from the Federal Armed University in Munich, which have degrees in space. And that's for the German point of view, where we can get our knowledge from.
I think it's a very important question, especially in Europe. So, of course, there is the usual, I could just talk about the academic, way of exchanging information. We have all these kind of conferences to share knowledge, because this was mentioned today as well. It's not about just sharing data, about sharing services, but about sharing knowledge, which is even more difficult. And we have to all to recognize that the community in Europe dealing with SSA is traditionally very, very limited. It's a small community. And in the individual countries, we don't have all the knowledge for all the questions we have to address in the SSA, and it's obvious. And I mean, was obvious why my colleague mentioned the complementarity between different between different states, especially France and Germany. So I think we are lacking right now a framework to best benefit from that knowledge, which is spread over many countries. No single country in Europe has all the knowledge necessary to perform a proper job, and I think we really have to do our homework there in Europe.
Well, I do agree. In fact, in Europe, you find everything you need to achieve a reasonable amount of SSA. In France, as I was trying to explain earlier, there are different fields of expertise. I mean, just take the room here. You would all say you're working in SSA, but you're all doing very, very different jobs with very different expertise. What I've learned trying to do space surveillance is that we need CNES, for example, for the orbital mechanics expertise and the calculation. We couldn't do that in the Air Force, at least the French Air Force. But again, I'm pretty sure we bring Europe a unique experience of how you operate your sensors. What do you need to know to be useful to your government or to your armed forces? So it's very complementary again. And we're lucky enough to have in Europe different assets that could do a great job together. And again, you need to know exactly what your asset does, how it does it, what's the performances to really get the best out of it. So cooperation, that's the way. And we have to let go probably part of our, how can I say that? National interests to make it happen.
Yes. Okay. Well, the previous panel discussed the U.S. position on sharing information on military satellites. A question from the audience wants to know, what is the position of your respective governments on sharing data on your military space assets?
Well, obviously, we're all working on that.
This is on the record, I might remind you.
Well, if you remember the previous panel, they talked about the fact that people don't know a lot of things. They don't know if they have the authority to share. They don't know if it will have bad effects on their careers, etc., etc. Well, I'm taking the opposite point of view. I found that most of the time people think, they're in the military, they won't share anyway. But okay, you want to win at the lottery? Well, play, right? Play. We don't have many assets. We don't have a lot of people working on that. And right now, with all the budget difficulties we have, well, we have plenty of work to do. So we won't prepare for cooperation if we don't have to. So I guess, first of all, you got to ask.
Any other responses?
In terms of, and as I say, we don't have too much right now, but in terms of our ground-based assets, clearly defined in terms of our policy sharing agreement, that's fine. But as we move into a newer world of considering what other sensors we might like or what other sensors might be available to us in the UK, then I think we will get into that debate. So it falls into the basket of we don't have all the answers right now.
Well, us Americans tend to look at how things affect us, but we have to recognize there are other international relationships that don't include us. And so I'd like to ask the panel, there are two major space stakeholders not represented here, I don't think at all, and that's Russia and China. I'd be curious to know, how do your organizations envision working with the Russians and or the Chinese on space situational awareness issues in the future?
Well, why not? It's space security, right? Well, so far nothing's going on from a French point of view, but there's no reasons why we shouldn't cooperate if an event requires it.
I think from the military perspective, it will be a little bit difficult to cooperate with China and Russia in military things, but on a civil organizations way, I think it's no problem because what the French guy said, it's space situational awareness and to protect the space assets. Therefore, we are glad that we built up the GSEC with two entities, the military and civilian side, so we can put that all together. So I think that would be a good way to perform that.
I'm not aware of any approach or dialogue we certainly militarily have had with either of those nations. And like my German colleague said, given that we have the UK Space Agency that deals for us in Europe and does a variety of things, it would be logical, should we be approached or feel the need to, that they would probably take a lead in those sorts of activities. One of the problems we are thinking our way through in defence at the moment is how we engage, recognising the requirement we have to engage and we should do more of it. How do we engage and with who? We have our close friends and allies represented in the audience here that we routinely engage with. And since I've been in post, we've probably had approaches from up to a dozen different countries. We'd like to do it all, but coming back to my point earlier, we currently struggle for resource. So we're getting our heads around the how and who should we engage with in the future.
I think we are coming back to one of the main problems I was trying to point out with the approach we all have right now. I mean, the approach we have right now is that we all have our own SSA systems, and frankly, there's not many out there, and there's definitely two big ones, and one is the Russian as well. The problem is that we are thinking still of having centralized data collection. Of course, we are all happy to take in everything we can get from anybody else, but it's not going to work that way. I mean, we have to provide the other ones something as well, and we have to mutually provide really valuable data, not just provide some services which we have under our own control. And I think that's really the big challenges we have to face when talking about including new partners and doing some really, truly international sharing of information. And as I mentioned, we'll need sharing of information at really the basic level. It will not be sufficient to share some services or share high-level information if we really want to tackle the problem of how we are going to ensure long-term sustainability. So, I mean, there's good examples how it could work. I mean, on the science side, we have collaboration with both, with Russia and with China. We share data on a scientific level. We maintain limited catalogs of objects for scientific purposes, especially for space debris research purpose, with both, especially with Russia. But we had to build, confidence and trust over years, over many years, in order to share data, share knowledge. And we are sharing this intentionally only at the level of what you would call here in this country metrics data or position and velocity data of objects. It's raw data. Sometimes we share orbital data, but with a lot of additional information. We don't share anything else. We don't even characterize the object. We don't share any additional information. Our objects are just numbers, and it goes, it goes back to that one idea Brian was mentioning, that sharing that basic data would be, let's say, kind of the vision for the future. And I would like to ask you if who in the room still remembers the ages when high accuracy or high resolution maps were classified? I mean, it's not a long time ago that, basic geodata was classified. Nowadays, in most countries, the basic geodata is public, even including some aerial, data or some space data. It's just amazing. And I think we have a long way to go, and we have all to do our homework until, the basic SSA data, we are at the same stage with that basic data. It's a vision, and I think it's probably mandatory to go to this direction if you really want to ensure the long-term sustainability of outer space.
Actually, we have a short story and little experience, so there is not much to talk about. But I think data sharing is very important, important one, and we try to sharing research result and observing data.
Great. Thank you very much.